author and investigative journalist Naomi Klein believes China is ready to finally show off a potent hybrid of the most powerful political tools of authoritarianism and global capitalism. To discuss the significance of China's debut on the Olympic stage, the Real News Network's senior news editor Paul Jay spoke to Naomi Klein in studio.
Welcome back to our series of interviews with Naomi Klein. Hi, Naomi.
Hi.
So the argument, I think, if we were sitting down with some of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, they might make, is that what's the alternative to this hard centralized party? Look what happened to the Soviet Union. That if we didn't have this kind of surveillance and this kind of strong leadership, what you would have is the falling apart of the country, the mafiaization of the country, corruption would run rampant, China would break off into little fiefdoms. If they wanted to give a bit of a Marxist spin to the defense, they would say that Marx and Engels teach you need to exhaust capitalism before you get to socialism, so that's what we're doing. Of course, I never read in Marx and Engels that you should allow multimillionaires into the party, but at any rate,
open Hooters bars in Shanghai.
All
on the road to socialism.
But what's your answer to that? That without this, they'd be looking at a capitalist anarchy rather than at least a planned capitalism.
Well, I don't think they're transitioning to any kind of socialism, and I think we should just sort of take that out of the discussion. I mean, they are the most successful capitalist economy in the world, and to me the question is, what are we willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency and in the name of economic growth? Because by those measures, China is the most successful economy in the world right now, by the measures that we use in our own countries. And so to me, my interest in this model is that I see it as a warning. I see it as actually the global trend. And you're talking about Russia, and it is true that Russia had a democratization, opening up period and a very anarchic economic reform process. China's response to that was, we're not going to have the democratization. We're just going to ram through the reforms and as brutally as we want. And the Tiananmen Square massacre created a terrified population for many, many years, where they were able to socially re-engineer a communist country into a capitalist one and have people just accept that because they had seen that this is a government that is willing to roll tanks over their elite university students. So imagine what they would do to factory workers. And
what you're suggesting is, instead of Rupert Murdoch's vision of his satellites and televisions bringing democracy to China, China's in fact going to be exporting this, what you called Web 2.0 communist capitalism, to us.
Well, what I see is that China is becoming more like us, the West, in many ways, and we're becoming more like China in many ways. That there's, and I wouldn't say that we are the same society yet, but what we see are these sort of steady trends and a kind of an odd sort of meeting in the middle, where they embrace the side of our society of extreme consumer capitalism, and our leaders start to embrace many of their tools of social control, indefinite detention, loss of civil liberties that their leaders are embracing. And I think the more successful China is, the more persuasive this argument becomes. Absolutely, India gets beaten up all the time by business people who are working in China and India and going, look, it's a hell of a lot easier to do business in China. Well, it is. But the question is, what are we willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency and growth?
One of the things that didn't get exported in globalization and in the Chinese model that does exist in the United States, still to some extent, was antitrust legislation. They used to do all these labor-free market reforms in these countries in Latin America. I mean, Mexico, I guess, is the best example, where you introduce all kinds of market reforms without any antitrust legislation. And I wonder if you think perhaps the Chinese model and some of these other models are going to put pressure on the North American model to weaken antitrust legislation under the argument we need big state-defended monopolies to compete with theirs.
On any standard, we see that downward pressure: environmental standards, labor standards, antitrust. Absolutely, it's the story of globalization. Or say we'll relocate completely, pit governments against each other, or say we'll relocate completely.
Perhaps that's a good segue into the next segment of our interviews, where we're going to talk about the progressive movement and Obama. Please join us for the next part of our series of interviews with Naomi Klein, author of The Shock Doctrine, which has just come out in paperback. Thank you.